Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 12th Ask an Expert webinar. For those of you who've been following us for a while, you'll have noticed that we've had a short hiatus on this series, and we're back. And we are very excited to discuss our most recent publication with you today that centers on child empowerment. We are joined today by three fantastic panelists who I will introduce to you in just a few short moments. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Jordan Hill. That reminds me, I need to introduce myself. My name is Francesca Gottschalk. Jordan and I are both analysts on the 21st Century Children Project, and we will be co-moderating this webinar. So before we dive in, I'll hand over to you, Jordan, to outline a little bit more about the format of today's webinar.
Thank you very much, Francesca, and hello, everyone. So just a few quick a bit of housekeeping. I took a look at where you're joining us from, and it's actually great to see that we've got almost 300 registrations from over 80 different countries today. So that's really great, and we really appreciate you all taking this hour to sit down with us and have this really important discussion. We've received strong participation from the audience in previous webinars, and we really hope it's going to be the same this time. So please prepare your questions. Don't hesitate to start sharing them in the chat. I can see some people already saying hello. That's great. You can address your questions to specific panelists or to everybody. So please don't hesitate to indicate who you would like to answer your question when you write it down. Thank you to those of you who've already sent in some questions. We've already had some really good ones, so we'll be trying to get these out there today. I'll try my best to get all the questions in, but it might not be possible in the hour that we have if we receive a lot of questions. So I'm going to be grouping them together into themes, and we might ask more thematic kind of questions using the different ones we receive. So thank you very much for that, and I'll hand back to Francesca.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Before I introduce you to our great panelists, I am going to quickly give an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So in the 21st Century Children Project, we've been working for the last around year and a half on child empowerment. And why is this? It's because we know that this features really highly on policy agendas around the world. The nature of modern childhood is changing, and children are increasingly seen as competent social actors. In our research, we found that this suggests that meaningful participation can contribute to better outcomes, whether this is in education systems, socially, and society in general. So we asked the question, how can education systems support child empowerment? When we were doing this research, we came to the realization that child empowerment is often either not or is very poorly defined. So part of our task was to come up with a working definition. And in order to do so, we met with various different stakeholders, from policymakers to researchers to people working on this topic around the world. And we came up with this working definition that suggests that empowered children have the opportunity and ability to act on issues that are important and relevant to them. They can learn by making mistakes, and they are key contributors to democracy. Children, importantly, are not just adults in the making. This comes into a little bit of the discussion about beings versus becomings. We don't look at children as becomings, but rather as beings, and childhood is an important stage in and of itself, not because we're growing into what will be in the future, but because of who we are now. Children are part of the fabric of our society, and they are able to help shape our shared future. When we think about this definition, there are a few key things that we should be keeping in mind. First of all, equity. We need to make sure the opportunities to participate and to be empowered are equitable. We need to think about children's age and their maturity. The way a 4-year-old will look in an empowered way is different than a 15-year-old, for example. Adults are key facilitators or can stand in the way of certain child empowerment initiatives. So we need to think about the role of adults in child empowerment. Children always need to have choice, and they need to be willing to participate in decision-making processes and in other initiatives around their empowerment. And these should always be tailored to be important and relevant to them. And importantly, we really need to keep child rights at the center of this discussion. So some of the key themes that we looked at through an empowerment lens in our most recent report that was published on May 15th is we looked at children as citizens of today. Excuse me, you can hear my cat. Children are no longer seen as future citizens, but as citizens of today. Their civic and citizenship skills and knowledge can grow with learning opportunities and their inclusion in decision-making processes about things that are important and relevant to them. We also looked at COVID-19 and child well-being. This is a topic that emerged as a really high priority in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. OECD countries are still very concerned about well-being trends regarding children and how these might have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that well-being underpins child empowerment, and interventions tend to require significant time and resources. We also looked at media engagement in this report, and we know that critical media engagement can help children develop a sense of purpose and pro-social behavior. Media education can be one where children contribute to it with their own lived experiences, and this can help root this in things that are important and meaningful to them. And finally, we looked at digital inequalities. We know that inequalities in the digital environment are pervasive and they risk undermining empowerment, whether this is a lack of access to the digital environment or a lack of skills in being able to use it effectively. Provision of digital services, learning opportunities, and support, importantly, for risk management and harm management can help all children reap digital benefits. So with that, I will stop talking and I will hand off to our first panelist. So I would like to introduce Caitlin Faye Maniti, who is the former president of the Irish Second Level Students Union. She has represented over 300,000 students nationally, negotiating with education stakeholders on different policies. Currently, Caitlin studies at the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, and actively participates on various committees and boards, including the Shared Island Youth Forum and the Lift Ireland Youth Advisory Board. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Francesca. G. Vikarja. Hello. Again, my name is Caitlin Faye Maniti, and I am overjoyed and delighted to be here to share my perspective on child empowerment. Thank you, before I begin, thank you to OECD for giving me the opportunity to speak here today and also to contribute into the recent publication. So I have been involved in activism since I was around 8 years old, starting with initiative to create a greener campus at my primary school. And back then, believe it or not, I was told that I was a very energetic and loud child. Now I am 20, but I have no plans of ever being quiet. Now, to this day, I have participated in numerous youth consultations, board committees, advisory groups that have shaped significant national and regional policies, including anti-bullying policies, accessible public transport, and curriculum changes. In 2022 and 2023, I served as the Uachtaráin, or president of the Irish Second Level Students Union, otherwise known as the ISSU, representing second level students in the Republic of Ireland. This role allowed me to hold the ISSU seat on the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment and participate in various forums such as the Senior Cycle Redevelopment Partners Forum, long title, the Anti-Bullying Steering Committee, and etc. Currently, again, I am a first-year undergraduate student at the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, studying entrepreneurship. I am dedicated to advocating for and amplifying the voices of children and young people in decisions that impact them. Again, as highlighted in my perspective, I have no PhDs or masters, yet my expertise and qualification for being here today as an expert comes from being a student on the ground, and in this way offering a unique but crucial perspective. Now, to me, child empowerment is when a child or young person can start a campaign or project and use their voice towards something that impacts them that they are particularly passionate about. For example, the global climate action movement, protests against gun violence in the US schools, the Vote of 16 negotiations in the European Union. These are incredibly impactful movements led by children and young people. But unfortunately, they only gain traction when unaddressed issues reach a crisis point. Our anxiety and frustration over climate change, or the disregard of our rights in the Vote of 16 campaign, pushed us to ignite change when we felt nothing would be done otherwise. Now, in Ireland, there is a positive shift towards including children's voices in policy development, initiatives like National Youth Assembly and the establishment of a student participation unit within the Department of Education are steps in the right direction. These developments not only make policy more inclusive, but also provide an environment for young people to gain confidence in their ability to voice their opinions. One out of the main themes under Chapter 7, highlighting the cross-cutting themes of child empowerment, is the role of the adult. My journey as an advocate was significantly influenced by many teachers, but one teacher in particular in my secondary school who encouraged me to continuously apply for leadership roles and provided me guidance throughout all my challenges. This teacher was my good adult, my one good adult, and that theme is under the kind of theory that it only takes one person, one good adult, to instill confidence in someone for them to reach their potential. And sparking my desire to participate and supporting me along the way, this experience underscores the importance of having a mentor who can guide and inspire confidence in young advocates. So any and all adults in the room in this webinar, do not underestimate the power of your voice and actions in empowering children. This also, unfortunately, can be a double-edged sword, and where many adults can have an over-influence in encouraging children, so much so that it no longer is the children's genuine voice. I call this manipulation, and sadly, it happens way more often than you think. To avoid this, more supports for facilitators, teachers, adults who are in the environment of empowering a child should clarify their role and responsibilities as being a tool to encourage, facilitate, and build capacity for the children to input in a meaningful way. As the ISSU Uachtaráin president, I often found myself as the only young person in the room, full of adults. I had to build my own capacity by putting in work before and after meetings just so I can either understand the contents being discussed and input my own voice. Because I was the only young person, meaning that the readings for meetings were not catered for me to understand. This experience can be intimidating and challenging. So without systematic support to encouraging meaningful input, it is crucial to have multiple young people included in those rooms, including those from different backgrounds in these settings to build a collective capacity and ensure that our voices are heard and valued. Another key recommendation is to write reports and policy papers in simple and accessible language. Complex language and jargon can make it difficult for young people to understand and engage with the content. This is also highlighted under the UNICEF Global Program Framework on Child Participation and UNICEF Guidelines for Child Participation in Advocacy, where it emphasizes the importance of using clear and understandable language, describing it as child-friendly language and materials. In conclusion, child empowerment requires tangible changes and collective effort. The impact of the one good adult can shape young advocates, and systematic changes are needed to build the capacity of young people to contribute meaningfully. By having child-friendly language and materials, clarifying roles and responsibilities of adults in the room, and ensuring meaningful participation, we can create environments that amplify the voices of young generation and shape our shared future together. And to say this at the end is that I am just a student from rural Ireland, loud and energetic. I was lucky enough to come across opportunities, safe environments, and some amazing people who supported me and nurtured my confidence to use my voice. I guarantee you that there are so many children, loud and energetic, or even quiet children as well, and young people who can take my place here today. We just have to empower them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And I have to say that reading your words and then hearing you reiterate some of the points, it's been really inspiring and eye-opening for us on the team to have somebody give us such practical calls for action. You did that a couple of times in the opinion piece, which I thought was really great. So I'd recommend all of our listeners, all of our viewers here today to check out Chapter 7, as Caitlin mentioned. So you reiterated this a little bit today, but in your opinion piece, also in the publication, you talk about the importance of confronting manipulation and tokenism. Is there an example that you can give us of a process that you've participated in that you think did this particularly well?
In addressing manipulation,
Yeah,
or in myself, or maybe a system?
either way. You
Either
can take
way.
the question as you want.
I'd say it goes back to ensuring that there are multiple children in the room, multiple young people. I do remember an example in which there was a advisory group that was with the whole purpose of encouraging and finding problem or solutions to improving child participation in a certain system. And what I was asked to be seated at the advisory group, and I realized whenever I first came in that I was the only young person in the room when the whole purpose of the group was to encourage the voices of children. So I think what I did in the first agenda I put on the table was to invite other young people so that it's centered around them and their voice. So making sure that the capacity is there for other young people to and also like the visibility that there are more than one young person. So it's harder for us to be ignored in the room.
That's great. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And we'll come back to you in the panel discussion. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Maria Francisca Elgueta, who is a high school history teacher based in Santiago, Chile. She was the 2022 recipient of the Global Teacher Prize in Chile and is the founder of escuelaglobal.org. She has worked for 12 years in high vulnerability contexts in Santiago. So I'd like to pass the floor on to you now, please, Francisca.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you so much for this opportunity and for the opportunity to share my opinion through the report. It was incredible instance, and of course an honor to participate in that space. I'll be sharing with you. If can you see my screen?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, great. So, well, hello, everyone. My name is Francisca Algueta. I'm a 34-year-old high school teacher from Santiago, Chile. For the past 11 years, I have worked as a teacher in highly vulnerable contexts. And for the last 4, I have focused on school reintegration. Throughout my teaching career, I have learned how complex it is to empower students in marginalized contexts. The school where I work serves students who have been out of the school system for 2 or more years due to repeated violations of their rights, leading them to juvenile crime, drug use, exposure to abuse, and homelessness. Explaining the reality of my students and the complexity of restoring their self-esteem and belief in themselves would take a long time. So I will share an experience instead, that it's the experience I shared in the report. Like many teachers, in March 2022, I was happy to return to in-person classes after nearly 2 years of school closure due to the pandemic. I returned convinced that we were going back to the pre-pandemic reality. I arrived at the school with enthusiasm, confident in my abilities as a teacher and ready to motivate the students. But the reality was different. Fortunately, I don't have pictures of what followed. A few days into the school year, the school was already in chaos. Distinguishing between class time and recess was practically impossible because we couldn't get the students into the classrooms. Criminal gangs were lurking, and we battled drug trafficking and drug abuse all day. The team was disorientated, demotivated, and exhausted. The students had no sense of belonging. My classes weren't working. I couldn't capture their attention. I remember waking up with anxiety and entering the classroom with stomachache. I also remember crying in my director's office, saying I couldn't do it anymore, and maybe it was time for me to quit my profession. If I couldn't engage with the students, they might drop out again. We had already lost them once. Losing them again would be very serious. The winter holidays came, and with time, rest, and perspective, I reflected. What if behind the apparent lack of motivation, disinterest, and defiant attitudes of my students, there was really a lack of self-esteem? What if what really was happening was fear of the school and learning? Fear of a space that has always told you that they don't belong, that they're not capable? I decided that before quitting, I was going to give it my all. Of all my years in classroom, at that moment in a reintegration school, I decided to design the most challenging, exciting, and ambitious learning unit of my career. I invested my entire vacation in creating a new unit, resulting in a wonderful booklet intended for 3 months of work, where students would delve into the history of hate speech and the process of dehumanization during the Second World War and the Holocaust. I was convinced that my students had a lot to say about history of exclusion and marginalization, and that they could make critical and empathetic reflections to analyze the past and connect it with present issues. The booklet was spiral-bound and in color, filled with images and fascinating activities aimed to developing higher order skills. I decided to accompany it with the graphic novel of Anne Frank's diary. It was said that students at my school didn't read. I was determined to prove otherwise. We returned from winter break and I prepared to welcome my students. I covered the classroom with timeline posters and photographs. On each desk, I placed a booklet and a novel. A week into the unit, I took these photos in the classrooms. They are not staged. The students really immersed themselves into the unit, eager to learn. They waited for me in the classroom door saying, "Come on, miss, we need to start." They came in talking about movies or series they found related to the topic. Students from other grades came asking for if they could have copies of the book because they had looked in the library and it wasn't there. Not only they want to read, but they had also gone into the library. During classes, my students began to actively connect what we were learning with their own context and current issues. Discussions arose about the consequences of exclusion and discrimination and how they saw these effects in their communities. We talk about racism, violence, and the wounds of our society. We discuss about democracy, its fragility, and how we all need to work to improve it. Most importantly, for the first time, my students saw themselves as part of society, as individuals who could observe, criticize, and improve it. They moved from invisibility to questioning and proposing actions so that they and their communities could take a leading role in building the society we want. The school environment began to change radically. From one marked by disinterest and violence, the atmosphere was now filled with learning. We had incredible learning experiences, bringing the world into the classroom and taking the students into the world. I remember that at the end of our visit to the Holocaust Museum, after the students participated nonstop, excited by everything they saw, the guide told me that they were the most enthusiastic, reflective, and best prepared group she had ever received in all of her years working there. Towards the end of the unit, we welcomed an 101-year-old Holocaust survivor to our school who came to share his testimony with the students. I remember that day with so much emotion. The whole school was ready to receive him. I remember a student saying to me that morning, "Miss, this really feels like a real school." The event was spectacular. The students' respect, attention, questions, and reflections were remarkable. They shared their poems and paintings they had created with Rudy Hyman. The pride on Kevin, my student, in his face as he signed his poem says it all. That afternoon, Rudy posted a photo in his Instagram where he wrote, "I am very happy to have collaborated on your project and educational model. I was struck by the questions from the young people. They were very different from the usual ones. They weren't historical questions, but rather about human sensitivity. That's when I realized that my contributions was more humanly significant than usual. That moved me a lot." I dare to say that in this unit, I've seen the greatest development of complex, critical, and creative skills in my students that I've seen in all my years of teaching. For the students, it was a tough challenge with ups and downs, but undoubtedly exceeded all expectations. They enjoyed learning, and above all, they came to believe in themselves as capable and as important members of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francisca. I think it's a shame that you couldn't see all of our faces. I personally was smiling a lot throughout your whole presentation. It's so inspiring. And I think the way that you took this sort of beings versus becomings, looking at your students as beings and the importance of that in the moment. It was really, really great to hear that in your own voice, not just in your written words. I have a quick follow-up question, and well, we'll get into it now. We know around the OECD that teachers tend, and in general around the world, teachers report really high levels of stress and burnout. And you also allude to this both in your presentation and in your written piece. This is especially because demands on teachers have increased substantially in recent years. Do you see any kind of tension between teacher well-being, teacher autonomy, and child empowerment? And if so, how can we address this?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I believe, of course, they are truly connected. I think as long as teachers, as long as we don't delve ourselves into teachers' well-being and teachers' conditions and all of that surrounds teacher work, we will not have teachers doing their best job. And we will have stressed out and burnout teachers who eventually, like any other human being, will not do their best. So I truly believe that I don't know if this is the reality for every country, but here in Chile, especially, I would say that maybe one of the keys to resolve this is to create a supporting system to schools, because schools are becoming responsible of every single problem of our society. It's like it's all just we give it to schools and we give it to teachers, and in our case, we are dealing with all of the consequences of a fragile system of our well, about everything, and we're dealing with that in schools. So with a better support system, I believe teachers will have better conditions, and with that, teachers having more time to prepare really engaging lessons and really going into what's important, which is our students and what they're learning.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really important point to make, and it's something that we allude to also in some of our project, that teachers can't do this alone, and education solely cannot be responsible for all of the issues in dealing with everything. So we need to think about ways in which we can lessen the burden on teachers, such as through strategic partnerships, ensuring adequate funding for programs and supports, professional learning opportunities. So thank you. I think that really answers the question well. And without further ado, last but not least, I would like to introduce our third panelist, Sherry Irfan, who is the current president of the Irish Second Level Students Union, the ISSU, the national representative for secondary school students in Ireland. As mentioned, the membership spans over 250,000 students. Sherry has currently completed his first year in college at Dublin City University, studying law and history. And he also attended our expert meeting that we hosted in Dublin last year. So that's where we met you, Sherry. I'd like to pass the floor to you, please, for your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And can I thank the OECD again for inviting the ISSU here today. So to give you a quick overview of what the ISSU is, like Caitlin said, it is the Irish Second Level Students Union. Caitlin did the job last year. I took it over from her this year. We are, of course, a national representative body. We represent over 250,000 second level students across Ireland. We're an organization and a union that believes in a ground-up approach, in the sense that everyone in our union is democratically elected. No one is picked or handled. We have elections for every single position. Like I said before, we have a structure that is representative of students across the country. So we have a bunch of regions. Each regions have regional officers elected whose whole responsibility is to look over regional issues within the region. Now, depending on the size of the region regional officers are dependent on that. So once a year, the president, along with the regional liaison support officer, does a trip around the country where they organize local elections with students, where they're democratically elected to their positions, focusing on local issues. Those regional officers then feed into the national work of the union with the National Student Executive, or the Cuiste Gnó. The Cuiste Gnó is quite big. It has 12 officers. It covers a range of different briefs. You have your president, your deputy president, your honorary president, your welfare officer, sustainability, equality, regional liaison support, sustainability. All these briefs are covered within the executive, and we've seen over the number of years that it's only grown because the ISSU has gotten a deeper influence into matters related to education, civic education, and student participation. This is different from what it was like pre-pandemic. I got involved in student activism in my first year of secondary school, so when I was 13, and this wasn't really something that was there at the time. The ISSU was still a developing organization. You didn't really see student participation being a big consideration in terms of the work of the Department of Education. Of course, there were consultations, but they would have been, looking back now, many would admit they were quite tokenistic. There was a big change post-pandemic. It was interesting to see because myself and Caitlin got involved during that bit when we kind of moved up into the union, and we saw how our influence really kind of picked up off the ground, and all of a sudden we were everywhere. There was a reason for that, and part of that is that the output of officers that we were getting at the time through our election system was of quite of a high caliber. The students that we got who were running the executive at the time were very experienced. They knew what to do. They really took hold of the moment. They made sure that the student voice was at the center of those particular issues. Now, over my term, I believe our influence into the Department of Education and our influence into student voice and student participation has grown quite considerably over the past year or so. And the greatest example I can give you is September of last year, it was announced that the Minister of Education is going to be reforming or accelerating the senior cycle redevelopment process. Now, our final exams in secondary school are called the Leaving Certificate exams, and they determine on how well you score in your exams on a points base, which college or university you will end up going into. For many decades, people remember those exams as quite horrific. They look at them with, not so good memories because it is a terminal exam and it's not representative of the student itself. And what we campaigned for many decades was that the terminal exam be removed. And we had been lobbying the Department of Education. We had been lobbying people internally along with the minister. And we were quite happy to hear that the minister had listened and that the terminal exam would no longer be there. There would be an exam, but it would not count towards 100% of your results. There would also be an additional assessment component. That was a big victory for us as students. And in 2021, that was really certified when we were asked or appointed to the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment on the Council of Members by the Minister of Education. The president holds a seat on it every year. We get a turnover. We're currently working on making sure how we can get a second seat because, as was mentioned before, I'm the only young person in the room. And it's a lot of work for me to get through all the reading documents, make sure I'm briefed up, make sure I know what I'm doing before I walk into a meeting, because you will always be at that slight disadvantage of being a student as a young person. You don't know better, you're just coming in through the door. So we're trying to make sure that there's more than one person there so that you can piggyback off each other in meetings as well as these forums. And what we're asking for is no different. The teachers' unions have it, the parents have it, every other organization has two people there. Why not the students? And I think that is something we'll be working on a lot more. To speak to the child empowerment bit for a few minutes, every young person I can tell you who's been involved in activism or has done the job has had that one particular person in their life that has really motivated them to get involved. And like Caitlin was mentioning, for me, that was someone who was a youth worker of mine. Um, I was born in Pakistan, and my family emigrated to Saudi Arabia in the late 2000s, and I spent about 5 years there. Now, we didn't have student councils there. We didn't have any sort of student participation, student democracy. So when I moved to Ireland and I was sitting in my class, it was a brand new environment, a brand new country for me, and a brand new culture to settle into. One of my teachers during, I think it was our science class, was talking about how there's a student council. Now, believe it or not, my only perception of a student council was from watching movies. And all the student councils were from America, and I watched these movies, and I was like, this sounds really interesting. I might as well put my name forward and go for it. And I did. And there I met a youth worker. His name was Billy. He was from Donegal, and he put me up for an election without actually telling me. So he randomly pulled me out of class one day and was like, "Come with me, you're going somewhere." And he wouldn't tell us where we were going. Put us in the car, took us down to the local the elections that were taking place, and pretty much just threw me on stage and was like, "Talk about what you want to talk about." And I got on stage all nervous, and I was like, "Oh, I want to talk about equality and these issues I'm really passionate about." And somehow I ended up being elected. And that's how I started out. I never thought I'd end up here. I never thought I'd be capable of speaking to so many people. But it was because Billy saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, that I got to do what I did. And I'll forever be grateful to him for that. So that is the work of the ISSU. That is, I guess, our opinion on child empowerment, because it is particularly important now. We're very happy, and I am conscious that we're quite lucky in the sense that Ireland has a student participation that it does. And when I walk into rooms, I do believe my voice is of equal power to anyone else. So yeah, thank you. And by the way, I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Sherry. That was really interesting, and hopefully all children have a Billy to maybe not throw them up on stage, but to support them in the way that Billy supported you. It's really incredible to hear. In your short introduction, you mentioned something that you thought was very successful, the lobbying about the leaving certificate. And I think that that's a really cool example of the power of student participation and student voice. I'm curious about the flip side of that. What do you think has been the biggest challenge you faced in terms of making a difference for the young people you represent?
The biggest challenge probably is the fact that I'm the only young person in the room. I have an executive who are in second level education. None of us are paid for any of what we do. All the work that I do is out of my own want. So money is not a motivating factor for any of us. That is the issue, because you struggle with resources, you struggle with running an organization, managing a team while also being a student and a young person in today's world. When I walk into rooms, I feel like that I'm putting a lot of weight into things. I'm putting a lot of work into things. And ultimately, I'm one voice, and I'm sitting across the table with people who've been there for 5 or 6 years, who have 2 or 3 other people backing them up. And there is, of course, a level of politics involved in all of this, and you need to keep that into consideration as well. So if that has been a challenge of ours, it's number one, resources, and secondly, having the manpower to back it up, because we're there, we have the experience, we have the people there. It's just about making sure we get more young people into the rooms rather than it just being myself.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I'd like to invite the rest of the panel to please turn your cameras back on, and I will pass to Jordan. I think we have a lot of questions to get through, so please, Jordan, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Francesca, and thanks to all the panelists. Please do send your questions in. We've had a couple, and we had quite a few sent in before, but if you do have a question, please post it in the chat. So we'll start with a question from Andrew Thomas, from, I believe, from Norway. And I think this question would apply to everybody, but I will probably pick on somebody to start. I hope that's okay. So really, we hear that a key motivation for empowering children is that they have unique contributions, right? So it's not, they have contributions that are different to the contributions that adults can make because of their unique perspective. So the question is, how do we get students away from the urge to anticipate what we as adults want them to do, so they can be genuinely creative and express what they want? Randomly, Caitlin, would you like to start?
Thank you. I knew you were going to pick on me, Jordan. I think if there is, and with my experience in somewhat of consultations, and also whenever an adult asks for my opinion, there is a somewhat of an agenda or a framework set beforehand, whether it's the topic of climate, or it's the topic of education. And from there, our capacity is built from the information that they give us, and also what skills we need to meaningfully input. So with that support and the environment of the capacity building beforehand of this is what we're going to talk about, what is your opinion? And then us having the time and the space to think about that, and then come into the room and figure out what we're going to say. I think that gives us the time and the resources and the capacity to meaningfully input and to think about kind of like what's our creative input into this certain topic, or what issues or my experience can I express in here and kind of think of solutions for. I think from my experience, it's the prep that goes beforehand into including our voices and meeting us in the middle, kind of meeting where the children's at. Thank you.
Thanks, really interesting. Francisco, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Jordan. Well, I think my opinion is really related to what Caitlin was saying. I've realized that most of us, I'm talking about the position of teachers, right? Many of us teachers, we did learn in a system that was totally different from where we're moving towards. And sometimes we feel that curriculum or standardized testing always takes us like to form or students into one correct answer, which is the one we're waiting. But I've realized that once we move away from like basic skills and we move towards to upper or to higher order skills, and that's when we are able to teach students to create their own questions. And that's, I think that's really important, to teach students to select their own sources. We need to teach them to select proper sources, but we need to teach them to select their own. And finally, to build their own answers or solutions. And that for us teachers is a whole challenge, because most of us, we weren't taught like that, and at university we weren't taught to teach like that. So it means like a whole new approach.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, and also to hear the teacher education angle as well, which was like a question that I had in the back of my mind. You know, talking about creativity in the curriculum. What about the teacher education curriculum? Sherry, would you like to make a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is give space. And by space, I mean not set up a table, make sure there's nice markers everywhere and there's an agenda. But the fact that to remove yourself from the room completely as a teacher or as a facilitator, you need someone who is neutral. You need someone who can actually relate to young people. Because if I was back in secondary school again and I was sitting across the table from my teacher and my teacher was asking me, what do you think I can do better? Or what do you think we can fix in the school? I'd be a little bit hesitant, because I'd know in 20 minutes time I'm back in maths class and she's going to be teaching me again. So allowing people, especially young people, the room to figure out what they want to say, what the questions are, and also having a facilitator who is neutral and who understands young people and can engage with young people. Now there's training out there for that, and I'd encourage, if anyone is doing something along those lines, that they do have a structure and they do have facilitation training for whoever is going to facilitate that particular table.
So in addition to the training for the facilitator, do you have like a kind of profile in mind, or where can you find somebody who could fulfill that role?
Usually, what we do is we identify people internally, but if you'd like a more formalized approach, you obviously set an agenda and you have an event plan in front of you. There is training out there. I know within the Department of Education and the department in Ireland and Department of Youth, Disability and Integration, again in Ireland, they do have people who are specifically trained for this. Now, I'm not considerably aware of what exactly that training looks like, but from my engagements with them, the facilitators who do the training are very much aware of who they're talking to, and they're very much interacting with young people the way they want to be interacted to.
Awesome, thank you. So we have another question from Ireland, actually, from Gerald Craddock. And I suppose the question is really, so I've had to adapt it a little bit, because from your three presentations talk about kind of quite different aspects of empowerment, right? So we've had student unions, we've also had classrooms, we've had different facets of empowerment, and obviously an empowered child is different because all children are different, right? So the empowerment is obviously different as well. So the question from Gerald is, how do you ensure that all students are part of some kind of empowerment process, whatever that might be, particularly students with diverse backgrounds and abilities? Francisca, would you like to start?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I would say, in my experience, what I've seen that works is that above everything, we need to create safe and loving spaces to learn. I've realized, especially in more marginalized, vulnerable contexts, or with students with complex backgrounds, many times they feel that school is not a safe place, that what we're teaching, of course, it comes from positions of power. So their voice is excluded from the beginning because of what curriculum teaches and everything. So when we create classrooms where students feel that their voice is important, that they'll be respected, that school values their communities, and that they're all welcomed there, I think that's the first step to change. Like, we can do many changes about curriculum and what we're teaching, but if students don't feel safe and unconditionally loved in our classrooms, then there's no change happening.
Yeah, really important point. Would anyone like to jump in?
I
Sherry?
can very quickly, yeah. So in my experience, sometimes when consulting with young people, you have to keep in mind that there will be certain communities that might not want to engage with you, and you always need to keep that in mind and respect that. One particular, I guess, minority group that we really struggle with interacting with, and it's a general struggle, is the travel and Roma community within Ireland. There will always be a little bit of a disconnect. Now, there's reasons on both sides for that. You have to be very critical and very sensitive of how you approach them, and how you are trying to get information out of them. It's very important to also take a step back when things get tough. So if a community or if a person's like, no, I do not want to engage with you on this, you have to respect and take a step back. Sometimes people get into this thing of, we have to have that voice on the table. Sometimes that voice does not want to be on the table, and they're not ready for that yet. And you respect that and you take a step back. The biggest thing, like was said before, create an environment in which your voice is going to be respected. Are there additional needs that that minority group needs to keep in mind? You make it as accessible for them as possible.
Yes, and to kind of piggyback off both the answers there, I do 100% agree with creating a safe space, ensuring that kind of we believe, and then they also in turn believe that their voice matters, and also that they are accessible. But also to add on to that is also the visibility of young people who are able to input. So to know that, I think an example I can give is whenever you're younger, in the younger years of school, and you see that the older kids have positions of in the student council, or they're able to have more responsibilities. And also for me anyway, that I was seeing another woman and another Filipino who was able to be in that position, and I can see myself, oh, if they can do it, I can do it too. And so that's also another thing, having the visibility of like other children there that are able to input, and then others as peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer encouragement, they can also encourage others to input.
Thanks very much. We have kind of a related follow-up question, actually. It's a little bit different because it's not specifically about students from diverse backgrounds or abilities, but we have June who's asking that he says he fully agrees with translating messages to something more intelligible to children and students. But he says that a more difficult question might be, how can we help children and students attend to these matters and emphasize them in the right way so that they understand the significance of the questions or the significance of the topics? How can we kind of sell the topics to them, which is kind of a little bit different to what we already discussed, to encourage participation without making it seem like there's a kind of right answer? Shari?
Yeah, look, as much as we might try, it comes down to the language. The biggest thing is make sure when you're putting together the questions, set up a focus group of young people from your school, run the questions by them. Again, I'm very grateful for the Department of Education because when they do consultations at a bigger scale, I usually get a call ahead of time and are like, hey, can you please look over this document? Can you read this report for us? Make sure that it is in line with what young people would like. So make sure you have a group of people there, young people who are engaged, who believe in what you're doing, and are going to give you honest feedback on what will work for them and what won't work for them, rather than assuming from the get-go.
Can I jump in, Jordan?
Yeah, go for it.
And something that you made me think of something that we talk about a bit in the book, Sherry, is this comes out in the opinion pieces in chapter 7, but also in various parts of the book, is that including children and young people only at the end of a process, it's almost a surefire way of not necessarily asking the right questions or asking questions in a way that will prime them. So we had a group of researchers from the Netherlands suggest rather than doing research for children, we do research with children. So we include stakeholders in creating the questions and figuring out the solutions and the problems. Francisca, you also alluded to this when you were speaking, but really seeing how can we include different stakeholders from the beginning of a process through the end of it. And I think that'll help us ensure that we're asking the questions, the right questions, and in a way that's not going to prime anybody for a specific type of answer that maybe we as policymakers or teachers or adults in whichever capacity we're working in would necessarily expect or want.
Caitlin or Francisco, would you like to jump in on that? Yep. Okay, so we're getting a few questions coming in now. So there is one from, oh, 1 second. Oh, so we have one regarding younger children actually. And I'm not sure who wants to jump in on this one, but we have one saying, oh, sorry. What kind of, so what kind of policies can promote empowerment for younger children or in the early years? And how might this look different? Caitlin or Shari?
Yeah, I think from the publication from the Lego Man, as I would kind of that's how I read it. I was like, oh, there's a Lego perspective. Oh, the Lego Man's talking, and so like empowering children through play and getting them interested through gamifying the process of getting their voice. I think that was very interesting perspective, and I really enjoyed reading that. So I'd encourage you to read that as well. But yeah, just through play and meeting them to where they are.
Francisco, would you like to jump in, or it's fine?
I just would add up that sometimes and I've seen it in my own experience as a teacher, sometimes we have really like low expectations for younger students. And once we bring challenging questions and we push them to create their own answers, it's really impressive. Like well, Francesca said it at the beginning, but it's kind of, we're always waiting for students to become adults to change the world. And once we push them to do it as young people, well, they can. And I've seen like the most creative and the most amazing answers to today's issues created by young people and not by adults.
Shari?
I recently, because we sit on the NCCA, read a report regarding consultations with toddlers and babies, and that was incredibly interesting for me to read, even though it's not relevant to the work that we might do in the ISSU. And from that, one of the things that I found particularly interesting was that you have to build these things into childhood from the get-go. So first of all, if you're a toddler in primary school in Ireland, maybe getting rid of the whole teacher-student dynamic, that the teacher's up there and the students down there. In some schools, I know that students address their teachers by their first name, making them equals rather than it being a hierarchy, or making sure that, when those toddlers or those young people are speaking in the classrooms, that their voice is mattered And there are certain phrases and words that I think experts know better than I do that you can use to let people know, or young people know, or those toddlers know that, look, your voice matters, and it's and something that we continue on through primary, secondary, and then tertiary education.
Thanks very much. I think we have time for one more question and then a quick round of kind of closing comments. We have a question from Larissa from Mexico, who asks how can we include families in these processes? What is the role of families, and how might we include them? And I was just wondering, maybe Maria, from your experience working in your classroom, did you include families, and if so, how, and what was the result?
Yes, I think that this is a big issue and a big challenge for schools, especially in our communities. I would say, and it also relates to a question that I read from Patrick. I think many times schools are the only, like, here in Chile we would call like a institution from the state that feels safe and feels for families and communities, especially in more marginalized and vulnerable contexts. So schools need to become more open spaces. Here in Chile, and I think throughout all Latin America, I don't know if that's the reality in other countries, but there is sometimes this like civilized position where schools become a place where we want students to get off of their roots and their families, and here we're going to change you, and we're going to create a better version of yourself that doesn't relate to your own communities. And I think that's the most dangerous thing we can do in education. So schools need to be open to communities. We need to get families involved. I've realized throughout my experience that all families want to do their best. Many times they don't know how. And it's in that process when we share strategies to help parents with their kids, and when we get them involved in what we're learning and the progress, that families get really involved and really enthusiastic about the learning process of their kids. So yeah, that's my perspective.
Fantastic, thank you. Caitlin or Shari, would you like to jump in?
Yep. Okay. So in terms of parental participation, I think that's it's very important. I think a parent should be involved in their child's education if possible for them. In Ireland, what we have is parent committees within schools. They have quite a lot of influence sometimes over student councils, which seems to be a continuous issue for us at the moment. But there are groups within the Department of Education I know that are represented. So, for example, the National Parents Council, they constantly work alongside the students. A lot of issues we align on. There's very few things that we would disagree with them on, because students obviously like their parents, and parents want what is best for their students. So there's ways that you can work together. I think schools generally do a pretty good job in Ireland of making sure that the parent or the guardian is involved in the education of their young person.
Yeah, and I would agree there with Shari from my experiences from last year, that the parents, specifically the representative body for parents in Ireland, were our biggest allies. So they really did work hand in hand, and whatever we had to put forward, we always had the parents behind our back, or whatever the parents had forward, we always had their back as well. I think going away from the kind of the not the education system, but as a whole, as a person who, or a young person who is an advocate, there is, I would say that my work here and the opportunities that were presented to me is a privilege, given that I was supported by my parents. And unfortunately, that is not the story for a lot of young people. And again, that goes back to making sure that the process of reaching out to children and reaching out to their voice is accessible, and that you reach a diverse group of young people who have different and unique perspectives and their different experiences, so that they can give their voice, regardless of where they come from, or what their ethnic background is, or what their abilities are. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'm afraid we're running out of time, but I would just, if I can be cheeky, just ask for one final comment from all of you in one sentence. What one action would you recommend policymakers or teachers take that could be empowering for children? Francisca?
That was the toughest. I would say install a culture of high expectations. I think that's the most important.
Thank you. Shari?
Be that older person for that young person. I had my Billy be the Billy to some other kid. Like I never thought I'd end up here. The only reason I'm sitting here is because of Billy. So, make them realize what they might not realize about themselves right now.
I think for me is something that's very actionable. Now it does come with a lot of, I would say, cost and work and money, would be to make all language in policy making accessible, that it's easy to read, that it's child friendly, so that all the children, young people can input into it and build their capacity from that.
Great, really important points. I'll pass back to Francesca to close the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. And I'm sorry we've stolen 2 minutes extra of your time, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. For your information, we will be continuing this series throughout the year, so please check back in for more webinars in the future. We hope to see more of you join us next time. I would like to give a huge thank you to our 3 panelists. You have been amazing. This has been such an inspiring discussion, and I wish that we had 2-3 hours to keep going. So that's a regret on our side, but I hope to keep in touch with all 3 of you. And a big thank you to my co-moderator, Jordan, to the rest of the 21st Century Children team, and to our communications colleagues for facilitating us having this webinar. And a big thank you to the audience and to everybody who submitted questions. And with that, I wish you all an excellent rest of the day and a wonderful weekend when we get there. Thank you, everyone.